All right, we're going to demo some of that SPC functionality that we've added to DataLinc. As you can see, the screen looks similar to what we showed in the last demo. We've added the data points that can be generated from the device. In this case, there's only 4, 2 doubles and 2 strings. And inside the data points, we show that we've added some calculations that have happened to. We can add a calculation to the data point. We want to add a Sheward control calculation. As you can see, we can configure the control. We can configure K. We can see the help fields that will help us configure this. And you can also see the data points with a value mask. And what that's going to let us do is pick which messages we want to filter or include in our calculation. So if a torque controller is doing multiple jobs, we can specify which jobs we actually want to monitor for this operation. There's a help feature here that will explain all of this information, the characteristics for the naming mask and everything, so you'll know what gets recorded and what does not. We're going to configure this one to go ahead and record everything that we pass into it. So it's going to record every message. Everything that begins with an ampersand we ignore. We forgot to set the buffer size. The buffer size will determine how accurate our calculations are. Obviously, the larger the buffer size, the more accurate our calculations can be, because we get a better average and a better standard deviation. So we'll save that. We'll start the device. I've actually lowered the recording interval to 200 milliseconds so we can get a much quicker statistics calculation than at 2 seconds or anything real. We've added a widget that visualizes this process. It's represented by 2 dials. We'll bring those up on the list. You can see the dials are both red at the moment. It's because we haven't gathered enough information to get an accurate calculation. So we've let it run for a while. We're going to go ahead and add some text so that we know what we're actually looking at. This is the second data point that we decided to record, so we're going to name it appropriately. Go ahead and add the dials that represent the first data point that we added, because this one's been running a lot longer. Let's go ahead and explain what we're actually looking at here. We can see, we'll get a zoom in of it here in a second, the dial on the left is giving us a percentage of measurements that are out of control. The guidelines, the Sheward control says that in a controlled process, we should show about 5% of the measurements to be out of control. And then on the right-hand side, this is showing us the slope of a regression line through all of the points that we are monitoring. So there are 10,000 points in the buffer, and we have to multiply that slope by 10,000 so that we can actually represent it on this graph. So we're pretty close to 0. We can edit the parameters for the widgets so that it works for your requirements, because different places will have different requirements for fault tolerances. And you may want to scale the slope differently as well. Now we're going to demonstrate the SPC functionality in the trending graphs that we've added. We look at the messages review panel. This looks exactly like it did in the previous demo. We have a max records field. We've added a couple search functions. We can search by external identifier now. If we're adding one, then we can search by date range. This will pull every record between the date and time that we specify. And we can pull the last n number of messages. I want the last 100. I want the last 1,000. And for this case, we're going to pull the last 1,000 records. The data table will populate, and we see everything. We're able to select independently which rows we want to throw into a trending analysis graph. For this example, we're going to select everything. We'll right-click and say Show Trending. We'll see it on the graph. This one's kind of busy. You'll see your bold blue line as your upper control and your bold red line as your lower control. The blue small line in the middle is the accepted value. If we zoom in, we can see our one point that happens to lie outside of the control limit. Auto range the range so that you can see where it hits. These are calculated over all the values in the data set. We can also export this to a ping if we need to. Now we can show the regression. If you'll notice, the regression doesn't look like it's moving. It's the bright green line. The slope is -0, meaning that it is in fact moving in a downward direction, but it's barely moving downhill. Now this concludes our demonstration of the SPC functionality in DataLinc. We'll be adding more and tweaking it as we go along.